You are listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propagandhi. On this episode, my guest is Dr. Tim Gill, Assistant Professor of Sociology at the University of Tennessee. Tim came onto my radar through his incredible Twitter account at TimGill924, where he discusses academia and higher education, but also occasionally his love of punk rock and Propagandhi. Chris Hanna himself is a fan of Tim's Twitter, so if you are using that service, go ahead and give Tim a follow over there. Tim's interest in Propagandhi, however, goes way back. In fact, his first ever academic publication was a chapter called Propagandhi and the Politics of Subcultural Resistance, which he co-authored with Dr. Philip Lewin, and which was released in 2012 in a book called The Art of Social Critique, Painting Mirrors of Social Life. We discussed that chapter a bit in this episode. On this episode, we also discuss music. Tim and I narrow in on 4 songs and discuss I Was a Pre-Teen McCarthyist, People's History of the World, Iteration, and Dear Coach's Corner. Seeing as how Tim is a professor of sociology, the discussions in these songs was in-depth with fantastic sociological examples tying into the songs, conversation about using Propagandhi as a teaching tool in his classroom, and much more. My favorite part was when he started discussing the work of Durkheim in relation to Dear Coach's Corner. This is a super fun episode, and I hope you enjoy my 4-song conversation with Dr. Tim Gill. Tim Gill, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propagandhi.
Thank you so much for having me here, Greg.
I'm delighted that you're here, Tim. I'm wondering if we can just start off a little bit and have you introduce yourself a little bit to the listeners out there so they kind of know a little bit about you before we dive into our chat today.
Yeah, definitely. My name's Tim Gill, and I am currently a assistant professor of sociology at University of Tennessee in beautiful Knoxville. Most of my research is on U.S. foreign policy, particularly in Venezuela. I do some journal articles. I write for some popular outlets, Jacobin, Washington Post, written for a piece for The Nation. And I have a book coming out later this year in October. That's sort of an encapsulation of my dissertation research and a little bit more research thereafter, basically on how the U.S. was trying to promote democracy, their vision of democracy in Venezuela since the election of Hugo Chavez in 1998. And so did a lot of research talking to former ambassadors and people that work for the NSC and for USAID and National Endowment for Democracy and all these sort of government agencies involved with democracy. Went down to Venezuela a couple of times, interviewing people and NGOs and stuff. So that's kind of what I do in my work and being a professor. Then, teach my classes at Tennessee, excellent students, teaching things like sociological theory, comparative poverty and development. Just taught a graduate course called U.S. Empire. I can trace my intellectual sort of lineage back to discovering Propagandhi, finding Propagandhi. They really, I would like to think I would have found my way to Chomsky and Zinn and all this sort of thing, but who knows? And it's certainly, I can lay that, I can trace that all the way back to listening to Propagandhi.
I couldn't agree more. That's exactly the same kind of thing I have. Like, I think about how many different turns my life could have taken had I not been exposed to this particular band and a few other bands as well. I'm not saying that Propagandhi gets all the credit or anything, but they get a lot of the credit. So I'm interested that you're not alone in the fact that we've had so many professors on this show who kind of given a little bit of a tip of the cap to Chris Hanna and Jord and Todd and John Sampson and everybody with regards to kind of opening their intellectual curiosity in the world. Can you tell me a little bit about getting into music and finding the band and everything?
Yeah, definitely. So I was born in 1984, and I was the youngest of 5. I have 4 brothers. A lot of music I would get through them. So initially it was a lot of grunge from the era. They would get CDs, Smashing Pumpkins. In the 90s, there was that blip of ska craze with Real Big Fish and the Boss Tones. And so I was that really piqued my interest. I had seen Smashing Pumpkins. That was like my favorite band. I was totally obsessed with them. But then I started getting, it reached a peak and music was going in different directions. Unfortunately, some of it went into that Creed sort of third direction. Smashing Pumpkins was now like they wanted to do like electronic stuff for a moment, and which is good. That album's good, but then there was ska, and that was like something I never heard before. And so the second concert I went to was Real Big Fish and Nerve Herder, and so I was really into like the Boss Tones, Real Big Fish, Save Ferris, and that kind of, then you'd be reading their liner notes and see other bands, and then that directed me towards Operation Ivy.
Mm-hmm.
And the only punk band I'd ever heard at that time was Rancid. That was like it. I thought, oh, there was like one punk band or something. But then, having the internet and starting to do research, then you just find there's this whole new world out there of different record labels. And then you have other friends that were starting to get into it too. That went to like the Suicide Machines. And so you see bands playing and friends, and then, just got lost in that world. And I'm still lost in that world,
Yeah.
And, but so for Propagandhi, like many folks have said before, my first experience with them was Nation States on the Survival of the Fattest, the Fat Wreck. It was so technical, the song, but it was also so insanely catchy and poppy with like harmonies in it. It starts out really like kind of intense, and then it's still, like I couldn't properly, when I was like 12, like I couldn't ascertain it, you know what I mean, properly. Like you couldn't, it was so complicated in so many ways, but I'm like, this is awesome,
Yeah.
And so yeah, that was my first experience there with them.
And I just saw them a couple times in Southern Ontario. They just did a tour, and I was really close to the stage at all three of those shows, and they did play Nation States each show. And that song to this day is still technically one of the most impressive tunes. You know what I mean? Like I know they've gone into far more of a technical direction over the course of their many records at this point, but I would almost put Nation States on any record as far as like performance and skill and technicality goes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, that's like as technical as you can get with like a poppy punk song.
Yeah.
Somehow they were able to maneuver their thrash sort of metal influence and put it into like this pop punk, like meld it together and still have just such a crazy catchy song. I mean, there's sort of a chorus. I was thinking about with their songs. A lot of them don't have choruses,
Yeah.
but they come back to some parts occasionally. And
right.
I mean, it's like, but it's not a straightforward like punk song with like verse chorus, but it's still like has that just wild catchy energy to it.
Tim, one of the ways that you personally really captured my attention was you tweeted about Propagandhi one time. It's been a couple years now since I think I started following you, but then you sort of became like this like notorious academic Twitter figure. And since I'm sort of involved in higher education on my other podcast where I talk to professors about their books, you're the mythos of Tim Gill on Twitter, the lore sort of has begun to spread. And I noticed that Chris even mentioned that he is fascinated by your Twitter as well, which must have been quite a compliment for you to have Chris, affirm that you're razzing and riling up the academic elite. And I was cracking up about that. How do you feel about that that whole Twitter world that you've got going on over there?
Yeah. No, that was awesome that Chris had sent that and showed appreciation for my words of wisdom. He we first started corresponding a little bit. I would send him some articles I read and wrote for like Jacobin or wherever, given his interest in U.S. foreign policy. And And I probably said something about, how important they were for me. And he would share those articles, and then occasionally we would like interact, he joined in on something about Ben Shapiro. When I kept telling Ben Shapiro to take a sociology class, he at some point, Propagandhi, Chris weighed in and said, our drummer George, he took a sociology class, and so he needs to learn from George or something like this. Yeah. I mean, I think about myself being like 12, and I grew up in Cleveland, and sometimes things just felt like so far away, being in a band or seeing bands, or even interacting with like this band that has been your favorite band since you've been like a kid, and then to have them interacting with you and joking around. Yeah, it is cool. It is, that was and remains a very meaningful band to me. And so, yeah. And then he messaged me just randomly out of the blue and was like, yeah, I haven't been on here much, but I just want to let you know, whenever I am, your tweets are just killing me, something like that. And so that felt really good, that they're a band that, I mean, I don't know Chris personally and the folks, but what you get from the songs, like, yeah, they're serious minded, they care about shit deeply, but they aren't humorless,
Right.
They've always made room for humor and laughter, satire. And so, yeah, I think that, which is what I get into on Twitter, is a lot of, satirical absurdities,
Yeah,
mixed in with serious minded stuff, and also trying to shine light on some shitty practices in academia and in politics, and which is a lot of what, propaganda is sort of all about. In the medium of Twitter, I think there's so much going on, but the fact that Chris Hanna would like what I'm doing and what I'm up to on there amid the whole storm of Twitter accounts was really cool. So I really appreciated that, and I hope you still appreciate my tweets, particularly about gas quality. But
yeah, those have been cracking me up lately. So I won't harp on this too much, but one of the things that I really liked about your Twitter is whenever you critique the higher education job market and all of that kind of stuff, because I was in a PhD program and I actually dropped out just before comprehensive exams because I realized I had no interest in going down that path. So I got out when I realized that it was something I really just didn't want to be a part of. But I've watched so many people who have like hated the process continue on, and they get so far into it that they feel stuck. Like, if I give up now, if I leave now, I'm leaving all of this stuff that I ever worked for. So I just like your Twitter because it shows me those absurdities that I was noticing. And then I think about the alternative pathway that my life could have taken. So that's what I really love about it. But you also have an article that you started your academic publishing career. And I just want to chat about it briefly because I know you have a co-author and everything, but you have an article called Propagandhi and the Politics of Subcultural Resistance, which you co-authored with Philip G. Lewin. And, we might have you and Philip come back sometime to talk about the article in a little more depth, but I'm just kind of wondering about the origin of this piece, what spurred you to writing this with Philip, and tell me just a little bit about this, because I think that if people listening are interested, they could go find this, and maybe we can try to make that available to them. But
definitely.
Tell me a little bit about this piece that you and Philip wrote.
Yeah, so Phil is one of my best friends, and we met in graduate school at the University of Georgia. He did his master's thesis was on the punk scene in Athens, Georgia. So he was very familiar with the sort of all that kind of literature of culture, sociology of culture and music and subcultures and so on. And he also is into punk, and we had a band together in Athens. And
nice.
We did a small 10-day tour up to the Midwest one summer. And so So you can still have a little fun in grad school if you know, move things around and whatnot. And don't tell your professors about it, because who knows, maybe they will scold you. But yeah, so there was a call, in the academia, realm. Sometimes someone will put out a call that they might have a journal, a special issue on a topic in a journal. But this was a call for an edited volume from Sean Bingham, and who eventually actually became my colleague at UNC Wilmington. So we actually met back up. The guy who did the book, I hadn't heard from him in a couple of years, and then he got a job. So that was cool to link back up while I was there. But so we had a call about, sort of art and social criticism, and sort of wanting to put something together about how artists are social critics, and that there's often a lot of sociology and social thought, sociological thinking. And so I immediately thought of Propagandhi. And so I talked to Phil, was like, yeah, we should write this, he likes Propagandhi too. And so he was sort of the mastermind behind a lot of the literature and put a lot of the stuff together. I was just starting my graduate career at that time. He was a few years older than me in the program. And so I was second author on that. He was first. And we just, thought about the lyrical content of Propagandhi, and how, the title of Subcultural Resistance wasn't just about how they're part of the punk subculture, therefore they're resisting, but also how they tried to shine light within the subculture on some, shitty, masculine, violent, homophobic, etc. practices that go on in the punk world. And a lot of punk bands didn't do that, or they were encouraging, shoving people around and using homophobic slurs and all this type of thing. Whereas Propagandhi was sort of like, they were showing how a lot of the things that punks criticize, they get reproduced within the scene itself.
Yeah.
And that, to me, that's sort of risky. I mean, Propagandhi has taken a lot of risks, I think, throughout their career in whatever it is. Like, I think there was a band like Big Wig, and they parodied, Propagandhi on their album, like, Don't Tell Us to Not Eat Meat, what I mean? So, yeah, I mean, I think that Propagandhi did take a lot of, or has taken a lot of risks in terms of their music. And instead of just, I mean, even from the beginning, talking in the Anti-Manifesto, saying like, we strive for something more than a faded sticker on a skateboard. I remember hearing that like when I was like 12 or 13, and thinking like, if I played in a band and someone had my band sticker on their skateboard, like that would be the greatest thing,
Yeah. And
then to hear a band say like, that's we don't care about that, it was really jarring. And yeah, I mean, so yeah, so they were that. So that was immediately that was my first publication. And yeah, I'm really happy about that. Definitely, if anybody is interested, and we could, they're happy to email me, email you, and we can get them a copy.
Love it. Well, you can email me at propagandipod@gmail.com if you want to check that out, and I will set you up. So there's a quote in the article that I think is really appropriate for what you and I are going to do today with some songs. You say, we examine how Propagandhi bridges their sociological imagination with a political imagination by utilizing innovative lyrical content within their songs and critically engaging the wider punk community through their performances. And I'm thinking about the infamous Gilman Street 95 performance where Chris is screaming, America rules, and if anybody moshes, I'm going to come out there and defecate in the pit and things like that. But we're going to do that with 4 songs. Should we go ahead and launch into some tunes here today?
Sure. Yeah. Might as well.
So the 4 tunes that we're going to chat about are Pre-Teen McCarthyist, People's History of the World, Iteration, and Dear Coach's Corner. I'm really excited to chat with you about Pre-Teen McCarthyist.
nose of a USA 10, separated flesh from bone and honed its skills on lesser humans and thus
First, we'll go just kind of in order of how the songs appear throughout the chronology of the band. And I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit to start about why you chose Pre-Teen McCarthyist as kind of an intro, and then we can dive into some of the lyrics and music.
Sure. Yeah, this song, Pre-Teen McCarthyist, is probably, I think it's the most meaningful song to me out of their catalog. I mean, I love a lot of their songs, but this one I really enjoyed, and it gives you insight into Chris's life, because a lot of songs aren't so personal, I think. And there are, a few throughout the catalog, but a lot of them are sort of on substantive issues, be it vegetarianism, U.S. foreign policy, etc. And I really like this because it gives you a lot of insight into his upbringing and sort of philosophy, if you will, a life philosophy. And it's I very much connect with the upbringing that he talks about. I went to school in Cleveland. I grew up in a neighborhood, West Park neighborhood. It's the west side of Cleveland. It's a lot of people that work for the city. My dad was a pipe fitter, and a lot of cops, a lot of firefighters. The area is very loud about its Irish heritage and and their working class nature. There's even a brewery there now called Working Class Brewery, and they have a pipe fitters porter, which I appreciate. But I went to a Catholic grade school there, St. Pat's. In some ways, there was repressive elements. They didn't want me to have patches on my backpack. They didn't want me to wear a Suicide Machines shirt, and everything was sort of like, I mean, I still have some teachers from there that I'm still in contact with, but still the social studies curriculum was the US is great, and of course God is great, and all these types of things. And so it's very insightful, relatable, and in the end hopeful. It traces out, I think, how we are indoctrinated in schools, and the basics of what sociologists call a civil religion, and to be patriotic and stand in front of the flag and have little art projects about the flag and all this type of thing. But along the way, you start finding bands like Propagandhi, or you start reading something on the internet about the history of US foreign policy, and you start realizing that things are not the way they're presented. And in that moment, everything in my life thereafter sort of came down. It has been about realizing hypocrisy of the U.S. and the indoctrination, and having a sort of global vision about what the U.S. has done throughout the world, and how others perceive the U.S. Like that sort of epiphany, if you will, is something that is still with me. It's something that my research is about, what I read about, what I try to challenge in a lot of my work. I love the line when he says, maybe you're a lot like me. You identify 14 years without a choice, terrified the moment you wake up and realize, you jump ship, you either swim for short or drown. And that is sort of like we oftentimes come to this moment, or like a break in our life, when we can go different ways. And some folks don't question the indoctrination. Some folks, buy the flag and fly it outside their house and whatever, but they aren't as critical often are not as critical of US foreign policy and of the founding of the country and all the rest of it, And so that song just always really, it just, you're 14, you're in eighth grade, and then you kind of get out, you go to high school, and he said, it just, him saying, maybe you're a lot like me, you identify it, just like, yeah, you can totally relate to that. But then it's optimistic too, I think, when you said, don't let the fuckers drag you down. Like, be confident. And yeah, things can be alienating, like I remember going into high school, and I went to Catholic high school too, and I was describing myself as an agnostic by that point, and people were sort of like coming up to me and like, you shouldn't be in this school if you're an agnostic, and you shouldn't, et cetera, and it's risky too when you're a kid and you start thinking differently, and you start challenging authority figures in some way, or the narrative of the country, or stuff about religion. It can be a very alienating experience. It's much more comfortable just to sort of sing the praises of the school and religion and the country. And so this song, I think, is great because he's saying, look, I went through the same thing. Don't let these fuckers drag you down.
Yeah, there's a line too that I'm curious about your thoughts on. So since your research is so involved in U.S. foreign policy, the line separated flesh from bone and honed its skills on lesser humans is a line that I'm particularly curious to have you comment on.
Yeah. I think that's another realization, that when you start looking around, you see that war is basically everywhere. Before moving to Knoxville, I was in Wilmington, North Carolina, and their number one tourist attraction, and people are there all the time, is a big like USS ship. It's a warship. Like, that's a tourist attraction. Like, people want to go and climb aboard this warship and look around. I mean, you see people in Hummers. You go to this store, I'm always going to the store to buy, get my son some toys, and they have a freaking tank. They sell, battle tanks. And so you start looking around and you just see this glorification of war everywhere. We've invaded places like Grenada and Panama, Iraq. There is oftentimes a justification. You hear people, something from Tucker Carlson came out around the time of the Iraq war, and he was calling individual, Iraqis, he was calling them monkeys and saying, basically, like, they're less than us. Who cares? I remember when Iraq was going on, and I was at John Carroll in Cleveland, and there was a debate, and one woman had said, who cares if we bomb them? They have bombs going off every day. It doesn't matter, and it's just a sort of depiction of that. Yeah, that there are some, individuals that are seemingly less than others, or that we should control them, if it's through violence, if it's through war, or if it's through other methods, and that's sort of what I look at in my own research, that the US and its promotion of democracy tries to get certain political parties elected. I mean, they basically intervene in elections and politics to try to get their preferred candidate elected, and it's sort of, to me, I talk about this in my work, I actually use the term that Propagandhi has deployed in the song. It's neocolonialist, in the sense that, just like the British and others, and the US in some places too, they think that it's their duty to provide tutelage to individuals who don't understand their own interests, right? And so in Venezuela, citizens were voting for Chavez. Chavez wasn't a perfect person. There was plenty of issues regarding democracy in the country, but the reality of the situation is that Venezuelans voted for him. That's who they selected. Why does the US feel that they need to go in and tell them, no, that's not who you should be voting for. You should be voting for these other people? And that's what they did. They had all these programs where they would, everything from creating fake community groups that would distribute information, basically trying to push people towards the opposition. They even linked up with some universities to provide schooling and promoting free market so that individuals could, as they said, push back against socialist ideology. So they had designed all these programs that were basically interventionists to try to get Venezuelans to vote a particular way, the vote the way that the US wanted them to. And so, it's still a mindset, I think, the term lesser humans, I still think it's a mindset that the US knows better, and they understand how to do democracy and how to do politics, and that they think that they should be imposing it. Meanwhile, we've had multiple presidents in the last few decades who've gotten elected without the popular vote. So it's like, we got a lot of problems here at home with our own democracy and electoral college and all the rest of it. But yet we still have this colonialist mindset that we should be going around and telling people how to vote and et cetera.
Tim, something else. So, Chris, I didn't grow up in a military family. So, Chris's perspective on this song is something that I've never personally experienced. But the bravery that it would take in order to grow up a certain way and then to turn your back on it in a way that everybody in your family would be able to see exactly how you've flipped, and then having to like be a part of that family, it takes a lot of guts. You know what I mean? Like, what do you think about this, like this bravery of like growing up in a certain mindset and then just like flipping your worldview so publicly and so, extremely?
Yeah. Definitely brave. I mean, when you find a lot of, I always, and of course there can be various permutations of this, but yeah, I mean, I hear a lot of stories from students and young folks and other people involved in the punk scene too, that they would come from a conservative family and where they're, the family's watching Fox News, and then they just totally have a break with that, and how much, how that can cause a rift between people. I mean, again, in some ways, yeah, life would be easier if you were just sort of went along with what your family said and didn't make any, didn't ruffle any feathers, and all the gatherings could be okay. But people have convictions, and, yeah, I don't know. It'd be fascinating. I don't know if Chris has talked more in depth about that relationship with his family and military and all this type of thing. But yeah, I would be very fascinated to know, to learn some more about that, if there was a big rift that was caused. And it's weird because my parents weren't in the military, but my grandfather was, and my grandmother, and one of my one uncle and an aunt. And so one of my brothers was in the Navy and came out. So I do have some lingering military folks in my family. I can understand how that could cause rifts. I'll just leave it there.
Tell me what you think about the music of this one. Do you have any particular thoughts about the performance in general of this tune? I personally love George's performance on this one. Tell me what you think about some of the music here.
Yeah, the drums are excellent. I mean, it's clearly during their, more poppy punk phase. And the song is very simple. I love playing the song on the guitar. It's a lot of the same chords, that's like a lot of the same 4 chords, and there's some various permutations towards the end and whatnot. But it's so like subtle and muted, and there's like no chorus really. And yet there's only 4 chords pretty much, but the way that it's arranged still makes it very complicated, like far more complicated than your straight ahead, just punk song, up tempo, verse, chorus, whatever. Just the ending of the song is always, it's weird. There's some bands you listen to, and like at particular points in your life, and you listen to them a lot, and like you can't stomach even going back and listen because you've listened to it so much, it's like worn off or you've evolved. But like that song is one that's just like the ending the song, when he starts to go into maybe you're a lot like me, it's like that, like after, that whole end of that song is just like still gives me the chills. Like it just, it's so it just like you can feel like the passion and emotion. And I just, that part of that song still just like totally crushes me. And
I gotta tell you, this is a song that every time I see them live, I hold hope in the back of my mind that Pre-Teen McCarthyist will be busted out every time.
Yeah. Have you?
I saw them play it once, like in 2007, but never since. But I'm never going to give up. Never going to give up. Tim, let's move on to people's history. What do you think?
At some turning point in history, some fuckface recognize that knowledge tends to democratize culture.
Sure.
Okay, so tell me why you chose People's History of the World as one of your 4 tunes.
Yeah, I mean, this song, no surprise, maybe why I would choose it. I guess I'm in the business of knowledge and academia and that sort of a thing. And so, the whole song is, it's pretty much about access, getting access to knowledge, and it has a whole like historical sweep of how knowledge has evolved and how it's been sort of circumscribed and kept from people, so on. I mean, and they talk about priests and clerics and elites. I mean, that's true, but a lot of books were formerly written in Latin, and only, priests and, elites knew Latin. Many dictatorial governments didn't want their people to be literate. Nicaragua, before the revolution, the Somoza government didn't fucking care at all about literacy. That was one of the main things the Sandinistas did, and in other folks that had a literacy campaign. One reason people, because they, seemingly didn't want people to be literate, didn't want them to be able to read. Why? Because then they can't they can only, it's only through orally, through what you could learn. You couldn't read something. So they say, at one point they ask, is it the same today? In some ways, I would say not exactly. Is it precisely the same today that knowledge is kept from the people? In some ways, sure, but that's why punks wrote zines, right? And they talk about this. We'll teach each other. We'll show solidarity, and that's like a lot of what they've done at their shows, having AK Press and zines, and trying to feature activists. Propagandhi has been trying to, if you think about it, try to broaden the access of knowledge, not just through their songs, but through their liner notes, through their website, etc. And so that's, they've really been at the forefront of punk bands. I mean, you go to their show, and I've seen them twice. And it's like a book, it's like a book market.
Yeah.
It's like you think you're at like a flea market or something, not a punk show, And so but yeah, I mean, I think fortunately some things have changed. So you have these sorts of events and venues, punks, writing, other people writing zines. We have social media now and Twitter. Students, I've taught in academia since 2011, and students come in with much more knowledge than they ever have. Maybe knowing about, Marxism, feminism, whatever it is, because of social media and because of, which is sort of in some ways a democratic sphere that you can talk. I mean, there are all sorts of complications and bots and all the rest of it. The reality situation, though, is a lot of has emerged from Twitter, be it Me Too or Black Lives Matter, et cetera, going from hashtags. I mean, these were sort of grassroots efforts that have been successful, and wouldn't have been at other points in time. And so is it the same? I think not exactly. Although, coming back to the issue of universities, universities are, it's expensive to go to school. So, many folks don't want to take on debt. There's a lot of discussions about erasing the debt and free tuition and all the rest of it. So yeah, many folks don't have access to a university. And if you think about it, it's not that people need to go to university. I think that, as we talked about before, if you do go through public grade school, middle school, Catholic, whatever, and then you go to high school, there's a curriculum that has to be taught. And if that's all that you get in your life, it's possible that you don't have access to alternative information. That's simply the point. Don't think. I think if people want to go to university, then they should be able to, and people don't want to, that's fine too. But the idea, but it remains true that many people, when they do go to college and they take whatever it is, history class, this, that, the other, it's oftentimes the first time that they're exposed to maybe a different narrative about the origins of the US, or about, Christopher Columbus and relations with Native Americans, First Nations, etc. Different ideas about race, sex, gender, class, looking at data, looking at scientific information. That is oftentimes the first time that folks have access to that information. But, and so, many are blocked. Many don't go to college. So, and then the other main thing about academia, which is perhaps one of the most like ridiculous, in terms of information, much of what we do is often then paywalled. And so only other academics can get access to it. Occasionally journalists will report, on findings, but even then, Washington Post is paywalled, and New York Times is paywalled, and all Scientific American. And so there still is a bit of, people have to get paid, et cetera. They have to have a job, but there still are impediments, I think, to knowledge. One being access to universities, and two, the fact that a lot of, certainly academics findings are paywalled, but then even, journalism can be paywalled as well. And so, then you're left with Fox News, television, or MSNBC, or whatever it might be. And so there's still, I think, there are some limitations on access to knowledge, but I think, I think Twitter and social media has been a good thing in terms of knowledge.
Yeah, and so I'm going to kind of use that here to kind of point us in a direction that I want to explore a little with you.
Sure.
So information is widely available to so many people right now. And you mentioned the adults come into college who are, sharper and more informed than you've ever seen in the rest of your career. These are good things. I noticed that in my own high school teaching, that the students got sharper and sharper with regards to, social awareness and critique of generations of power structure. Every year that I would progress, I would be just more and more impressed with them compared to where I was when I was their age. So even though they're doing better and better, we still have these lines here in the end of the song. It says, even if democracy broke loose, or you also have power still calls all the shots, they'll make the economy scream, etc. So we have this notion that even though we're informed, you have something like, the Supreme Court overturning a ruling on, guns today and things like that. So even though there can be a certain level of support, a high degree of an educated population, and then in the blink of an eye, it can all switch. So even though we're so smart and so informed and so engaged, basically at record levels, as far as I can tell, we still have this massive, not just like a journalism paywall, like you were talking about, but like a policy paywall as well in this country. And I'm just wondering if you can, take your paywall idea and extend it a little farther.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And that's the second. Yeah. That's the other main point of the song. It's access to knowledge. And then, okay, even if you get the knowledge and you're informed and, we're supposed to have a democracy, that there's still limitations. The reference, of course, as the Make the Economy Scream is with reference to the Nixon administration and their response to Chile and Salvador Allende. And when the Chileans elected Salvador Allende, a socialist, a leftist, who wanted to make some reforms, bring some industry under state control, expand literacy, expand social programs, etc. And they wanted to have relations with both the US and the Soviet Union. They didn't want to be, a satellite state of either. They wanted to forge their own path. And because, Allende wouldn't just pledge allegiance to the US and follow US global leadership, Nixon said that we're going to make the economy scream in Chile. And so what did he do? He worked with the CIA, through the CIA and actors on the ground, including General Pinochet, who eventually became the brutal dictator there for over a decade. They worked with the CIA to induce shortages in the country. They had businesses hoard goods, and this it made the population think that there was shortages because of Allende's policies, and that inflation because of Allende's policies. Now he wasn't. There were issues going on with the Allende administration, but a lot of the issues were caused by the U.S. and the CIA and actors on the ground that they were working with to try to make the Allende government, to end the Allende government and get people pissed off. They would plant stories in El Mercurio, which was a newspaper in Chile, that Allende had political prisoners in a dungeon, that Allende was, working with the Soviets to, create a Soviet satellite state. These stories were written by CIA officers and planted. This is one of the tactics that they do. So, yeah, I mean, in this instance, right, people wanted Allende. And what did the U.S. do? It power still calls all the shots, and they were able to work with Pinochet and get Allende overthrown, and he killed himself, and it was a dictatorship until the 1990s, and they're still dealing with the ramifications of the dictatorship. But you see, that countries do, elect leftist folks, and recently in Chile and Colombia and so forth. And the U.S. has sought to intervene oftentimes to try to undermine these groups, and showing the limitations of democracy in terms of, globally what the U.S. does. But even in the U.S. itself, there are limitations on democracy as well, in terms of, the funding, particularly campaign funding that goes to congressional folks. And even then, when people elect folks, what research shows is that congressional members represent the interests of their richest constituents.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there is, you think about, I talked with my students about this a lot too, and C. Wright Mills talked about this in The Power Elite. He's a sociologist famous sociologist from 1950s. And he was saying, a lot of decisions are controlled by elites. You think about what we vote on. Do we personally vote on a war? Have we voted on getting health care? Have we voted on aid allocations to Ukraine or wherever it is? No, we don't. I mean, you could say that, well, we voted for somebody to vote for us. And that's true. But a lot of decisions are made within, the State Department and USAID or Department of Defense. And, a lot of decisions are taken that we would disagree with. Like, for one instance, that foreign aid is very unpopular. If you put it to a vote, should we be giving funding to the Azerbaijan government, which is, has worked with us on the war on terror and is a dictatorship, and well, it's very authoritarian, pretty much a dictatorship. And citizens would probably say no. I like, the roads in our town are busted. Like, why? Right. Are we, So the point is that, yeah, we don't really get a say on all that many things. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I had to point out that I didn't know the Make the Economy Scream reference. So I appreciate you tying up that little loose end for me, because I'm looking at the lyrics here, and on the band's website, they have it in quotation marks. And so now that makes a lot more sense as to why those quotations exist. And we have unraveled a little piece of Greg's overlooked knowledge. So now I know. So that's wonderful.
Yeah, that was Nixon. I think he was talking to Kissinger, and they were talking about the situation, which we do. And Kissinger was saying, like, we can't just let them elect socialists. And Nixon was ordering, we got to make the economy scream. And I think there's even audio of it because he recorded everything.
Tell me a little bit about the music of this tune and how you feel about this banger.
Yeah. I think this is like the thrashiest pop punk song you could come up with,
Nice.
And again, it's a punk song, and it there's like no chorus, it shifts keys, and it's just, I mean, thinking about the music, this is what makes Propagandhi very unique in terms of punk. I mean, it really annoyed me when people would often compare them to like NoFX, who I don't as a band, I actually don't really care for. And they just never clicked with me ever. And I know a lot of people love that band, et cetera, et cetera. And so when people would say, oh, those first few Propagandhi albums are like NoFX or Lagwagon skate punk, I'm just like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, no. And Lagwagon's another band. I've seen them live. I just can't. it doesn't do it for me. I mean, I don't know, being exposed to Propagandhi and the complex nature, I'm just like, there's so much more going on. It's so much more intricate that some of those other bands I couldn't get into because it was just much less complicated, I'll say. And I'm not trashing those bands or whatever. I'm just saying that's just what it was for me. So like this song, for instance, I mean, there's like no verse, chorus, anything. It's a whole bunch of different parts. They're thrashing, and then, it ends with this like breakdown. So yeah, I mean, it's genius, I think.
I love it. Let's move on to iteration. Let's jump forward to Potential City Limits. So we've got a good little, chunk of conversation there on Let's Talk More Rock. Let's move forward.
So run through the proceedings, as chiseled through the canvas that cloaked his twisted face stained. His orange jumpsuit well with such rare distinction he was displayed. The evidence of outstanding retributions will make us of our kingdom come. Those days are gone. Nothing more than a number on a docket thing with shareholders and engineers. The emperor's politicians for privateers. How the fuck did I end up here?
So iteration has never been discussed on this podcast.
Okay.
And so I'm delighted to hear about it. And I'm wondering if you can just tell me a little bit about why you picked iteration as one of your four tunes.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I'm interested in U.S. foreign policy, and I think this is what this song gets at, I think, very well is U.S. hypocrisy. It's kind of like this mock, Donald Rumsfeld's on trial, which, obviously is not going to happen.
Right.
They're basically showing that, the U.S. is never accountable. It's never held accountable. And we often don't sign global treaties. We don't recognize international courts, many. This came to a head, of course, under Donald Trump with his America First. It's just totally like gets out of the climate change, the Paris Accords, and just basically snubs all these international courts. I mean, he took it to, its height, but it was still there. I mean, we couldn't even get, the disability, the International Treaty on Disability signed because all you need is a few conservative, sovereignty-minded senators to disagree with ratification, and that happened. And the funniest thing is that international treaty is based off the Americans with Disability Act, the ADA. And so, but still, they said, no, we're not going to submit to this treaty because we don't want to be held to we don't want anyone else to tell us what to do. And, which is just like, I mean, acts like a totally rogue actor so often. And of course, it's hypocritical because we do so much around the globe. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty much by design, right? The U.S. knows that we do so much. We're invading and intervening, and so doesn't want to be held accountable. And it's hard to imagine that Rumsfeld or George Bush or would be held accountable. So I think that, and again, it gets at the issue that the U.S. has been a country that's been nearly consistently at war since, at least since World War II. And as we talked about before, everything is war in this country. It feels like when you start looking for it, toy tanks, the historical markers, the ship, the glorification that goes on, yeah. And then I think the song also addresses at the end, and this part crushes me too, when he starts talking about this man who had lost his daughter. And I think it gets at this ever looming question of, why do people hate the U.S.? Why do people hate the U.S. government and the U.S. military? Well, okay, if you're friend or daughter or partner was droned or bombed or somehow killed by this group that's telling you that, they're coming to save you, then yeah, people are going to be pissed off. If some government killed my son, I would be unreasonably angry. And that anger could go down many different paths. And so, the question of why people would hate the US government after all our support for dictatorial governments and dictatorial policies, and our interventions and all the rest of it. Well, yeah, no shit, no, like no fucking shit. People aren't stupid. A lot of people abroad know a lot more about US foreign policy than people in this country. And that's because they have no other choice because they're subjected to it. Right. And so, and this persists as well. We don't say a whole heck of a lot about Saudi Arabia. In fact, that's oftentimes, every US president goes there. That was the first place that Trump went. Right. And there was the
orb.
Yeah, the orb and a bizarre Toby Keith concert about, drinking whiskey makes no sense. But then we pound the pavement about Cuba and Venezuela, which I'm not saying are, great governments, but only saying that the hypocrisy just looms. And so, go into, try to get certain people elected in Bolivia and Venezuela, but then, go and pay respect to the Saudi Arabian government. I mean, it's just totally, it's it's just totally laughably hypocritical.
Well, and I'm thinking too, as well, of like undeclared acts of war. Do you know what I mean? Like places like Yemen or whatever, where there's never been like a declared official act of war, yet the US government tends to operate in those places. And then we hear about it like way later, so there's like so much. And I think about the dead daughter's picture line all the time, because I have a daughter. And so when I read that, when I was re-listening to the song today before you and I got on the call, I was like, his dead daughter's picture. And I was like, oh God, it was just a punch in the stomach.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking about that as we got on our call today.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would be unreasonably, I don't know, it's hard to think about, I mean, yeah, before I had kids, of course, when you have kids, I'm not saying, of course, people can feel empathy, outside of kids, but when everything hits different once you have kids, when you see violence in films, and I never thought that would happen to me, to be honest.
Same.
Because I was always like, I'm a big horror movie fan, and there's almost like a informal rule that kids don't get killed in like young kids don't get killed in horror films. And I was sort of like, there can't be these rules. It's horror films. And now I like totally get it. It's just, it's very triggering when you hear about violence against kids and you have your kid and start thinking about your own kid. Again, people are empathetic without kids, not saying that, but it becomes very personal. And
so this album opens up with a speculative fiction, which is basically what this song is. It's a piece of short microfiction, speculative fiction, so what do you think about the scene and the vividness of the lyrics, telling this story of somebody who will never be held accountable actually be held accountable? How do you feel about this as like a sort of writing exercise?
Yeah, as a writing exercise, I think it's really cool, to put out these counterfactuals about, different possible worlds. And I think, I love speculative fiction too, the new Iron Curtain drawn across. I mean, it's really, it attests to their creativity. They've always, been into sci-fi and things like this, and some dystopian, and some literature. I don't read enough. I don't read enough fiction. I try to read like one a year. I'm just so steeped in sociology and nonfiction that I rarely have a chance to read any fiction. I like Kurt Vonnegut a lot, and recently did Audible, one of his, but I got to do a little bit more. But I enjoy this. I think it's really cool, especially in these regards, this kind of historical, counterfactual stuff. And I think it really is a testimony to the creativity of Propagandhi, and for them to push the limits and defy sort of genre conventions, as they always have, and to, as their music got more technical and the songs a bit longer, a lot of the content has become is more complicated. I mean, they have always been a band, they just push the limits on, a stereotype of punk is that, yeah, fuck your parents, fuck authority, and but it can come across very vapid, but Propaganda is sort of like, yeah, fuck authority and fuck what the government's doing, and here's why, and I'm going to explain it all, and so yeah.
So I have a couple of musical observations on this song. Whenever Chris has that line, "Can't gouge 10,000 eyes from a single head, so and then it goes into that and that snare roll that Jord uses to connect to the next line. I think we should observe a sentence that will serve to satisfy both the sense of function and poetry. That snare roll, I know it's just a snare roll, but to me, that particular moment in this record, is one of the crown jewels of this entire album. And Todd's bass line, do 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 do, underneath that section where it's so crystal clear, those bass lines. I just think that this song has some amazing musical moments that stand out, and I'm wondering if you can, if you have any comments or thoughts on the music. Those are some of mine.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. I mean, I think this is sort of that bass line, you can totally, that's amazing. I don't know, if it's, I was thinking about this song too. It's like they're going in this, I don't know if it's like prog rock or what you would say, but they're melding so many elements just so fantastically. And yeah, Todd's bass is really killer. Nothing against John K. Sampson, but Todd really brings in that those funky bass lines that you're just, I don't know if it's jazz fusion or what's going on, but he's got some really cool influences that you wouldn't think you could bring into this genre. And they just blend it so well. It's an excellent song. I can play Pre-Teen and Nation States and all the rest of it. I've never tried to play Iteration on the guitar or any of the or many of these later songs, because they're above my pay grade,
So question. So let's think about the previous record, Purina Hall of Fame, which from Today's Empires, which closes out the record on that blazing guitar solo. Iteration has a solo that also closes out this song, but it could not be more different. So whenever I was listening to this album for the first time, getting towards the end of Iteration, I was like, are they going to do a Purina style shredder to fade out on the record? And it kind of is there, but it couldn't be more different than Purina's. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that outro solo on this one.
Yeah, I love that. I love the ending of this song when it's Time and Tide, whatever. And then it does that da-na-na-na, da-na-na-na. Those guitar lines, that even just thinking about it gives me chills, because I love, it's very, it's kind of overused, but it does have a very epic kind of, that, and the ending of that song too, totally crushes me. It's and I think it works so well. It works because it's a somber ending. It goes from this whole situation down to Rumsfeld weeping, he's arrested, but then it kind of does get, it takes on a serious tone at the end. And I think the music matches it perfectly.
This closing line, no one can anticipate the inevitable waves of change. I think what we're seeing before our very eyes right now is a portion of the U.S. government that's doing everything in their power to ensure that inevitable waves of change are as hard as they possibly can be to actually accomplish. And I think we're seeing it in front of our very eyes. The last line of the song is what we're seeing every single day on the news right now in this country.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, is that you can't do what the US has done and expect that there aren't going to be consequences. You know, the term a lot of folks use is blowback. And, you know, that's what a lot of people aren't mad because we listen to Propagandhi or we, you know, eat pizza or whatever the hell. I mean, they're mad because of the treatment and that of what we've directly done in terms of intervention and the governments that we've supported and the ways that we've tried to impose our vision on other people. People don't like that. And yes, there are going to be consequences. And so, you know, a lot of things that you didn't think were possible, you know, planes flying into, you know, 9/11, you know, that this sort of situation.
Yeah.
Other terrorist attacks and on US sites. I mean, what happened in Libya, you know, people are upset with the US. And so that's, I mean, and so that's what you know, and you do see some other changes throughout the world as well. In Latin America right now, for instance, a region that I'm familiar with, you know, you have seen so much change that's ensued. Historically, the US has been sort of, you know, viewed Latin America as its backyard. And people were not happy with that. You know, they overthrew the Somoza dictatorship. They have elected people like Evo Morales and Hugo Chavez in the post-Soviet world after the U.S. sort of claimed victory and, you know, the end of history and all this type of thing. And, you know, the triumph of capitalism. And actually, no, people are not happy with that sort of project. They're not happy with U.S.-led neoliberal capitalist privatization, et cetera, et cetera. And so then what do you see? You did get someone like Hugo Chavez in power in Venezuela, who basically embodied all of that resentment towards the U.S. and its policies. So, you know, the waves of change are there. I totally agree with that.
I love it. Well, let's jump forward a couple more years to the supporting cast LP and your selection from that record, Dear Coach's Corner. And I know that you've used this in your own classroom, as have I once upon a time when I was teaching undergraduate courses in a college of education, where I got a lot of blank stares at me at the end of it, but I was trying to use it as like a music analysis for how to, like, you know, use music as a source in a social studies classroom. So I've actually tried to use this one myself. Tell me a little bit about why you chose Dear Coach's Corner, and then we'll get into some of that other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great song, great content. I'm not a hockey fan or anything. I'm not against hockey. It's just not something I grew up around or watching. I mean, it's cool. They have a team here, the Knoxville Ice Bears, and I want to go. It's just hard with kids to do stuff at night and bring them, etc. So I have nothing against hockey. I think it's cool. It's just not. I grew up wrestling and playing baseball. So I can totally, like, the line, I should say, you know, when he talks about all his fond memories of childhood, etc., are connected, like, totally with me as well. You know, like, so much of my youth is connected to wrestling and baseball and, you know, places. I still talk to people and they're like, oh yeah, I'm from X. And I'm like, oh yeah, I played in a baseball tournament there. Like, I wrestled. And if sports connect you, you know, my son is wrestling now and he's just finished his first t-ball season. And they really do put you into contact with folks you might not agree with, and that you might not spend your time around. There was at my son's baseball game every weekend, there was a car showing up with like these huge like billboards on it in support of like the freedom truckers, anti-vax, all this type of stuff that was on there, and so you do get put into contact with folks that you would disagree with, and so Chris is still saying like, yeah, even though he disagrees with Ron McLean and his pro-military, strong foreign policy and all this type of thing, and he's saying like, yeah, we still have this connection because we both are like unreasonably love this game of hockey, and it's a kid's game at the end of the day, but like we love this shit. And so I totally get that. But at root, the song is totally Durkheimian. There's a sociologist, one of the founders of sociology, Emile Durkheim from France, and he basically wrestled with the question of what holds society together. And in his book, basically what he argues is that rituals hold us together, and not just what we would normally think of as religious rituals, going to mass, and of course all of that is there. But he says, he asks in one passage that, is there anything different between Christians celebrating days in the life of Jesus and citizens celebrating all these different holidays, and basically saying that there is, and from him we sort of came up with this term of a civil religion, and so that there are rituals, there's rites, there's rallies, all these terms show up in the song too, around, for instance, the US, be it standing up with your hand over your heart, singing, et cetera, celebrating 4th of July coming up, Flag Day. There's all this like showing of respect for something that's sacred, which is, in this instance, is the country. I'll just tell this story. I think it's apt for this, the content here, and he says, he talks about at one point, military people repelling into the arena, and he's saying, this is just fucking insane. And it literally doesn't make sense. Right. I mean, so my niece and nephew and their parents recently emigrated to the US from Albania. And we were up there during the summer up in Cleveland, and I was watching the All-Star game that was in Cleveland with my 10-year-old nephew from Albania. And so the soldiers are marching around, and he's like, why are they marching around? And then there's like these big military planes that fly overhead. And so he's like, is the president there? And I said, no. He's like, well, what are they doing? Are they securing the facility? Like, are they trying to lock it down? Like, is somebody like trying to invade? I'm like, no. He like couldn't quite understand, like, why would they have soldiers on the field marching around and like these huge military planes all flying over? But I guess it's like, because we're saying like the military is great and kind of like glorifying the military. But like from his perspective, it like made no sense. Like he thought that, it was being secured because the president was there, not as just some like, military parade. It was just basically what it is. It's a miniature military parade. We talk about, how they would do that in the Soviet Union or North Korea, but that's basically what's going on. It's like it's a miniature military parade that's there. And it's like these rituals that we're doing to show reverence for the country. And Durkheim, he says it's not just, in class when we teach about it, I talk about, think about going to, when I was at University of Georgia, going to a UGA game. You got people are getting dressed up, they're getting painted, they're putting shirts on, some are altering their mindset. It's totally like a religious thing. They're doing their dog chants. They got a dog mascot that's someone's dressed up as a dog. People are doing all sorts of things, wearing jerseys of other people. I mean, it's totally ritualistic and religious in many respects. And concerts have a very ritualistic element, and the solidarity that's generated, birthday parties, even the songs, all these type of things. And so Durkheim was sort of like, this is what brings people together, these sorts of rituals, and that they generate what he called collective effervescence, that you feel connected to other people, and that this is it's sort of it's kind of a mundane observation. Of course, he's writing in the beginning of the 1900s, but it's also very profound, and that is true, that we often do seek out, whether it's a religious service, whether it's a game, whether it's a concert, whether it's a birthday party, that you get together and have this collective solidarity, that ultimately is showing some sort of saying something is sacred, be it a friendship or be it the team or the country. So we read Durkheim, and then I play the song, and it's just so like the rituals, the rites, the rallies. I mean, the song is totally what Durkheim is talking about.
I'm so curious about how your students go from reading that to hearing this, and then what those conversations are like in your classroom. Do any like examples linger in your mind of how those conversations have gone?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's kind of funny playing the song because I don't know what they expect, and then it's like 10 a.m., and
and you have to explain who Ron McClain is to a bunch of kids in Tennessee.
Yeah, right, exactly. And then it's like, and then it's so crazy at the beginning, like and he's just like thrashing, and they're just like, what the, and then it tones down, and so we listen to the song, and then I do think they start thinking about like, why would you do that why would you have the military marching around for like a baseball game? I think then the conversations are there, and we start thinking through where elsewhere we see these types of things. And I can't say there's one thing that necessarily sticks out in my head, but I think that we sort of just try to illustrate. I think it's a fun illustration for them. I try to mix things up in class with songs, and I need to do that a little bit more. Have a little fun. Maybe I should do an extra credit where they bring some songs to me or something, and then
that'd be awesome.
Yeah, we could play them in class if they connect to like a sociological concept. But no, I think they like it. It's a fun exercise that I do. I always feel very awkward right away because then you got to picture like me standing up in front of the class, and they're all like listening to it, and I'm just standing there awkwardly,
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm supposed to play like air guitar or what, Yeah. So I just, it's awkward, but no, but they like it. And they, I think it evokes a lot of discussion about the themes, and sort of like making something that's very familiar to us, which is you go to the game and they come out with the guns, and sometimes even like shoot them or something, and you're just like, why does this connect?
Yeah.
So it does a really good job of evoking conversation. I played another song. I'll say I took a sociology of sexuality class in undergrad, and me and another student had to do a presentation on like gender roles and stuff. So I played Refusing to Be a Man, and the professor was like, it was amazing to see. This dude was like 70, and he had never heard anything like that, and he was just losing it. He was like, this is amazing. I got to contact the publisher, because he was using a textbook. He's like, this needs to be in their textbook. He was going out of his mind. And so that was great to see. But I played that as an undergrad in that class.
Amazing. I have to point out, Tim, that you literally did what Chris did with, having to have this conversation with his niece, but you had it with your nephew. Like this, yes. Like it literally happened exactly in the same way with your own family member.
Yeah, I never connected that. That's right. Now he says this culture of this culture of death. They taught, how do I tell her? Yeah. I totally forgot about that. Yeah, exactly. Cult of death.
I'm wondering about your thoughts on the end of the song here too. He's got these lines that I just love. It takes a village to raise a child, a flag to raise the children until they're nothing more than ballast for fulfilling a madman's dreams of a paradise where complexity is reduced to black and white. Can you tell me just a little bit about some of your reaction to that? Because I think those lines are just amazing.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's, Yeah, I think those lines are amazing. I mean, it's sad. People are always like, support, we got to support the troops. Well, then don't fucking send them into war, and don't drone other people. That's how you support the troops. Don't fucking, I mean, you're forever destroying families. I mean, I see it all the time. People on Facebook, that will have a brother who was killed when he was like 20 in Iraq. I have friends that were over there talking about all their buddies who were blown up. Yeah, a flag to raise the children, right? Dying. And often, it could bleed into a different discussion. Dying, for what? Ultimately, at the end of the day, for what? I would say U.S. global domination. It's basically so that the U.S. can be the dominant actor throughout the world. That's that they're dying for the flag to try to keep this, keep us the military might, but it's insane because you're ending people's lives, you're traumatizing families, countless families. And sometimes that trauma does turn into criticism. You do see a lot of veterans, a lot of folks who are, I think it's very important to listen to many veterans who are now, speaking out about war and its consequences and all the rest of it. And so, yeah, I those lines are really, really chilling, well put together, and super chilling.
Do you have any thoughts on any of the music in this song? I know you kind of talked about it a little bit, but do you have any specific thoughts on any of the performance of this tune?
I mean, I think, again, this gets into Propagandhi, now they're getting super complex. I mean, the music's amazing, and it really is. When it really it starts out crazy, then it's like muted, and then it starts getting into it, puzzled by, dun, 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 and it's just really, it's got that, again, this word is overused, but it really does have this like epic, intense feel. My wife Iola she likes Propagandhi a little bit. She hasn't listened to like her whole collection, but I remember when this album came out and I was playing it all the time, she absolutely fucking loves this song. So she can she can sing every word. This is like the one Propagandhi song that she sings. She knows every word to the song, and so yeah, I think that's just a testament. She doesn't really listen to Propagandhi. When I put them on, she likes it, but this one song she really connected with, and it's just like, this is so fucking good, Yeah. And that learned every lyric.
Nice.
And, it's really a great fucking song. I mean, and musically, I mean, it has multiple dimensions to it, and again, there's like no chorus, but like everything is like catchy but complex, and it just this one I think should go in the Propagandhi Hall of Fame. So amazing.
Well, Tim, let's bring this in for a landing here. We've covered so much ground on a couple tracks from Let's Talk More Rock, Potemkin City Limits, supporting cast, some really awesome stories. I'm just wondering if you have any like summative thoughts or takeaways on kind of like why this band matters to you, like how they kind of fit within the grand scheme of your life, and just any sort of like takeaways for our listeners today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm forever grateful, for the band's existence and for what they've done. It's hard to be in a band. I played in a couple, to get people together, to get them on board, to put their life on hold, to make it a priority, and then to have good song content and go out there and put yourself out there. I mean, it's not easy. And so, and they're still doing it. And so I'm so grateful for this band's existence. And as I said at the outset, maybe I would have found my way to Howard Zinn or Chomsky or thinking about vegetarianism. But as it unfolded, Propagandhi was the entity that directed me initially towards those things. I became a vegetarian because I read what they wrote, and it made sense. And I had never thought about it before. And so I became a vegetarian because of this band. I did read Zinn and Chomsky at an early age because of this band. I started thinking about the fact that people were using homophobic slurs. I'm like listening to this band when I'm like 12 or 13, and I was using them too. And then, I started thinking about that and stopped. And, so this band really introduced me into alternative ideas that I wasn't getting anywhere else at that particular point in time. And there really wasn't all that much on the internet. And so, and the music is great too. The music is excellent too. So they're like the total package, like great music, great messages that still resonate with me. And I can honestly trace where I am today back to Propagandhi, that they were the initial entity that really opened the door for me to looking at foreign policy and all other sorts of inequalities throughout the world. And then when I was in undergrad, I found sociology, I was like, holy shit, this is like people doing scientifically what punk bands like Propagandhi and the Broadways and Operation Ivy and others are talking about, like talking about classism, racism, sexism, and they're studying it scientifically. And I was like, this is like totally like the punk rock discipline. I mean, other disciplines, you can do this stuff too, not just sociology, but that was the one that clicked. I was like, this is like everything that fucking Propagandhi and other punk bands are talking about in college. And so now I'm a political sociologist and writing on these things, and forever grateful for their existence and their continued existence, and being good people and trying to make a better world, better musical world, and all the rest of it.
Love it. Well, shout out to the Broadways as well, and past guests of the podcast, Brendan Kelly. Great shout out there, especially because I'm from St. Louis, so the Broadway's just up the road in Chicago. It's kind of a nice little Midwestern connection. But Dr. Tim Gill, real pumped that you took so much time out of your day to come and chat about your work and the music of this incredible band and this batch of 4 songs that you curated for us to chat about. It means a lot, and I'm just really grateful to you for spending the time with me today.
Thank you. I'm grateful for what you're doing with the podcast, and very happy that you had me on. I really appreciate it, and I enjoy listening to all the guests.
I'll flank or raise the children.